Right, so your first knowledge question then on Magistrates is looking at what role they are playing in criminal and civil cases. So this is an 18-mark question, and it looks at basically what the job of a magistrate is. So you're looking at magistrates as in people and not the courts, okay? So as people, what's their job? Now, as you can see from here, it spells out the word paysand. So all we're going to do is go through their job in criminal cases, and I'll explain each one individually, okay? Right, so the first one then is preliminary hearings. Now, preliminary hearings used to decide what sort of court the case is going to be dealt with and if we've got enough evidence to actually take the case through. So, in terms of preliminary hearings, then we do this for tribal either way crimes and indictable. Because tribal either way, we don't really know where it's going, so we've got to obviously do a lot of work looking at evidence and whether we can take it to Crown or Magistrates. And indictable, we have to listen to your details before we then pass it straight through to Crown. So that's what the preliminary hearing is all about, okay, deciding what where it's going to go in that sense if we've got enough evidence. So, tribal either way, then the first thing we do is we have a plea before venue. So you'll remember this from criminal courts. Plea before venue is where you, as the defendant, have the chance to plead guilty or not guilty to your criminal offence. Okay? If you plead guilty, it will automatically be dealt with by the lay magistrates unless they don't have enough power and they have to pass it to Crown. If they plead not guilty, a mode of trial will occur. Okay, so if you fill that in first, just here, plea before venue, so it's where you'll plead guilty or not guilty. If guilty, obviously they will do something by taking the court, and if you plead not guilty, then a mode of trial will occur. Okay, in terms of what is a mode of trial then, well, this is where the magistrates have to work out whether they have enough power to be able to take your case. So they sit down and basically work to a checklist to see whether they're allowed to take your case or not. Okay, so if you fill that in for me. So a mode of trial, it's when you plead not guilty and the magistrates, in essence, they're working out if they can take your case. You don't need to go as much in depth like we did with criminal courts, things to consider and things like that, simply because you're not having the 18-mark question just on mode of trial. This is just a little bit of insight, really, for magistrates. And then finally, you can see their indictable crime. So in terms of what the magistrates do with indictable crimes, they hold an initial hearing, and that enables us to find out your name, address and plea. So initial hearing to find out your name, address and plea. More importantly, because if you are going to plead not guilty to the indictable crime, we need to therefore then summon a jury. So we need to get it on the electoral register and get the jury summons sent out. And obviously that takes a few days. If you're pleading guilty for the indictable crime, we don't need a jury. We just need to sentence you. Therefore, as a result, it'll be a lot easier. So it's nice for us just to find out beforehand what your intentions are, really. Right, admin duties then. What we're looking at here is what sort of admin stuff that the magistrates might deal with. So admin's all about paperwork. And what sort of things will they look at? Well, first of all, the magistrates decide warrants. So if the police officers want a warrant for an arrest, they want a section 60 warrant, or they want a warrant to come and search your house, it's the magistrates that have to say yes to that. Okay, so just make sure you bob all three in there for me. So section 60, warrant for arrest and a warrant for searching property. Okay, in terms of detention periods then, so what we're looking at here is in terms of what involvement the magistrates have with you being kept at the police station. So you'll remember from stop and search and arrest and detention that the police and the magistrates court do have some involvement. Okay, now with detention, the magistrates have involvement in keeping your detention time from 36 to 96 hours. So we upgrade it from 36 to 96 with the permission of the Magistrates Court. So that in terms of is what admin duty they have. The officer goes to the magistrates and they sign to say that you are able to stay for up to 96 hours. Finally, bail then. So the magistrates get involved in bail when the custody officer denies it. So if you're at the police station, they deny you bail until your court hearing, so they put you on remand in prison. Then we can have a hearing at the Magistrates Court, an early administrative hearing, and that's to decide whether bail will be granted by the court or not. Okay, so that's your admin, your A out of pace, and 3 admin duties that the magistrates have. Right, youth court then. So in terms of magistrates dealing with youth court, they deal with young offenders between 10 and 17. The magistrates must be specially trained in order to work in the youth court. You can't just become a magistrate and work there straight away. And both genders do need to be represented. So we can't have an all-male or all-female bench of magistrates. We've got to make sure that both are equally represented there. Okay. They deal with, on average, about 160,000 cases a year. So quite a lot of young offenders cases, actually, in comparison. In terms of sentencing limits, then, there's a few things you need to write there. So first of all, we need to clarify in terms of prison. So how long the magistrates can sentence you to prison. And that's 6 months for 1 crime and 1 year for 2 crimes. So a maximum of a year in prison. And in terms of fines, so magistrates are restricted. They will only give a £5,000 fine unless it is known as a level 5 offence. Now, a level 5 offence is probably like the most serious crime that magistrates deal with. So they look at summary offences and look at some tribal either way. So a level 5 offence is sort of at that top end. So things like selling alcohol or selling fireworks to anybody that's under 18, it will automatically become a level 5 offence, in which case they are unlimited. And some of your driving offences will get like that now. So if you just fill that in as your second point, your fines. So £5,000 unless it is a level 5 offence, in which case they'll be unlimited. What if they don't believe they've got enough power then? It just goes straight to Crown. So if they don't think they've got enough power to sentence you, they'll say it and they'll say that they're going to send you to Crown Court and you'll have your sentence there. That'll be dealt with at a later stage. Second day then, appeals from the magistrates. So when the defendant appeals to the Crown Court, magistrates sit on a bench with a qualified judge to listen to that appeal. But again, you do need to be specially trained. You can't just train to be a magistrate and do that. So if you want to add in the bit here for me, just that they'll sit in the Crown Court with the judge, listen to the appeal from the defence. Number of cases heard then. So magistrates deal with 97% of all crimes. The other 3%, they do listen to at the early administrative hearing. Obviously, they'll listen to sort of your name, address, and plea for the indictable. So they deal with 97%. The other 3 are obviously dealt with by the Crown Court. Although, as you'll be aware, if you do remember, the Crown Court only end up actually dealing with a jury. Only ends up having to deal with 1% in the end. But 97% is what magistrates will deal with. Final letter out of Paysan then, D. Decide the verdict. So for summary crimes and some tribal either way offences, the magistrates will decide the verdict, i.e. if you are guilty or not guilty, and they'll sentence you accordingly, as long as they can obviously sentence you within their powers. Okay, if not, that's when they'll have to move it to the Crown Court. Right, so I'm just going to draw a line across the page here then. So the first half that you've just done is their criminal role, which spells out pay sand. As you can see here then, these 3 bullets here are what civil roles the magistrates have. So if you just switch it round so that it spells CIF. So civil debts, issue licences and family matters in the family court. Okay, now what we've got to be aware of is generally magistrates only deal with criminal things, but a very, very small percentage of their cases can be civil as well. But it is very, very small. Normally you'd go to the county court or the higher court. So I'm going to start off with C then, civil debts. So if you just want to fill in next to here, examples of civil debts then, so it's things that you don't pay, which means we then have to take you to court to get you to pay. So things like your council tax or your TV licence. There'll be quite a lot of variations there of things, any sort of bills, gas and electric, that you should have paid that you haven't done. So as a result, we can therefore take you to court for it. So just fill those as examples. Issuing licence then. So if you've had a licence taken away from you, such as like an alcohol licence or a betting licence, let's say you've been allowing under 16s to bet or under 18s to buy alcohol, you'll have your licence revoked. You then have the opportunity to go to the magistrates to try and appeal to get it back. Obviously you need to satisfy set conditions, but you apply there and hopefully the appeal will be successful. Finally then, family court. So this is where the magistrates are dealing with cases such as like adoption, I suppose any sort of divorce, child maintenance, anything really under the Children Act. But again, the magistrates need to be specially trained because this is dealt with sort of in a separate court. And the magistrates do need to have extra training because they're dealing with family issues. So anything under the Children Act of 1989, and just give any examples, so things like adoption, or I suppose divorce, anything relating to family really, as long as it's governed under that Act of Parliament. Right, so as you can see then, it's split into 2 areas. So we're looking at the criminal role of a magistrate and we're looking at the civil role of a magistrate, okay? And that together is your 18-mark question, right? What you need to be aware of though is they don't technically have to ask for both. A few years ago, one of the knowledge questions that was in the exam asked for the criminal role of a magistrate, but also the criminal role of a jury for those 18 marks. So what I don't want you to do is revise this entirely as a question on its own, even though it can come up as a full 18 marker like that. So you do 2 separate paragraphs, 1 criminal role, 1 civil role. Just be aware that they can mix the criminal role of magistrates and criminal role of juries together. Okay, you can't bullet point this. I suppose you could do it if you're doing it as a plan, but when you're actually writing it out, you've got to make sure that you're doing it in continuous prose, please. So even though in your plan you might write the word pay, sand and sift, properly you need to write them out and just tick them off as you get through. A plan's always handy really because it sort of keeps you on track and will help make your assessments a lot better. Okay, but that's your role of magistrates in criminal cases and civil cases.